Hello everyone. So I will explain you today an open source business model that works and which is quite different from what you used to see with traditional open source big players. Where do I move next? Okay. If you have a look at the different open source players that succeeded, you will find two business models that works for a software publisher. The first one is what we call open core, where you deliver the product as an open source light product and you sell extra modules for a fee. You will find products like Sugar CRM, Compere, OpenBravo in that system. The other model that proves that works with open source is where you have a dual product. You have one open source product and another one with extra things in it. As an example of this, you have Alfresco, which have the open source Alfresco, and the enterprise edition where you have the bug fixes of Alfresco. You have the same thing for MySQL. MySQL have an open source version, but you can pay the open enterprise edition, and then you have better performances in the product. I think there is a third way to develop an open source business model which is sustainable and that guarantees that everything is free so that you do not have to have a mix between proprietary and open source software in order to monetize what you did. But before explaining you that, I will explain you with an example, which is on my market, on how the other players, the mature players, which are the proprietary companies, are working now. SCP, which is a big enterprise resource planning software editor. If you have a look, I use this example because it's a mature company. It's, I think, $16 billion revenue. If you have a look at the profit and loss, I displayed here the profit and loss of SCP in 2010. They have 30% of their revenue, which is in light. The revenues are the light blue box, and the costs are the dark blue box. They have 30% of their revenue as services, 45% as maintenance, and 25% as licenses. So the license is the one shot you pay to get the software, and the maintenance is the service you pay on a recurring yearly basis to get services like bug fixes, support, and things like that. The interesting thing in the system is that a mature player, which is the leader in the enterprise management sector, has only 25% of their revenues as licenses. The rest is the maintenance for the big parts and the miscellaneous services. On the right, you have the costs. So for such a company, you have the sales and marketing, which is 25% of the cost. You have 20% of the costs, which are the research and development, and 32% of the costs, which are the services. So the main question is, how can we remain sustainable and competitive to that compared to that kind of companies while dropping these 25% of revenue, which are the licenses? So let's see if there is a way to remain competitive and sustainable. When I mean sustainable, I'm talking about a product that is growing year after year, which has a customer base that grows, features that grows, and people that are paid to make the product grows, and also people that contribute to make it grow over the long term. You will have the same kind of revenue analysis when you analyze the total cost of ownership of such a software in the customer side. If you are a customer and you need to buy an enterprise resource planning system, you will have a total cost of acquisition which is like this. 0 to 10% is the analysis, depending if you do it yourself or if you subcontract to someone. 25% of the cost today is the license on average. And the services are the rest. So the services is the training. You need to be trained to use the software, the data importation, the adaptation, custom developments, and things like that. So the main question is how to remain competitive if we do 25% of revenue per customer. It's all about margins. What's important when you run a business, it's not the turnover. So it's not a problem if you have 25% less of turnover. What's important is the margin you get, because the growth of the product or the company that will lead the product is depending on the margin. When you run an open source company, you have, of course, an open source development. So here there is an example. Traditionally, the growth of the product is depending directly of your research and development budget. The more you invest in research and development, the best your product becomes. But the problem is that research and development resources are usually limited. So a company will be able to put 2 million in research and development, $5 million or 20 million dollars, but that's limited. When you run an open source software, you can leverage the power of the community. If you succeed to organize a community and benefit from it, the growth of the product is not anymore depending on your research and development budget, but the growth of the product is depending on your community. When we speak about enterprise resource planning, it's not fun to develop accounting software. Developers do not like that usually. So the community is mostly composed of customers and people that resell the software, that sell value-added services on the software. So the great thing with this system is that when you run an open source software publisher company, you have a growth of the product that can be depending on your customer base. And the customer base grow, and the more the product grow, the more the customer base grow. So it's very interesting because you have a fast growth of the product at a very low cost. As an example, on OpenERP, there is an average around 5,000 people that are paid to develop things on OpenERP. And only maybe 3% of them are part of my payroll, which is very good. So as an example, we produce 30 modules per month with that kind of organization. Whereas traditional players like Sage or SAP will produce 12 modules per year. So it's very important. And it's not even OpenERP. I'm talking about OpenERP because I know it, but if you check at Compiere or OpenBravo, they have 26 accounting packages for different countries, whereas it took 15 years to Sage to succeed to reach 26 different countries for their accounting. You also know, when you do something in open source, you can also leverage big sales and marketing things. When you are open, people download it and can distribute and things like that. When you have a product which is downloaded 1,000 times a day, just imagine if you have to pay 1,000 salesmen to make demonstration to your customer every day. So it's very important to open your product so that people can see, download, and distribute. When you run an open source software, it can be used very easily by universities. Most of the universities do not have the budget to have SCP, to train SCP, or the student need to download the software in order to do their homework. So being open source allows you to have a very big marketing. And on the left, I showed you NetSuite compared to OpenERP, which it's Google Trends. So Google Trends measure the keywords and the number of people that are looking for specific keywords. The thing which is interesting here is that NetSuite, which is the leader in ERP in the US, in SaaS mode, software as a service mode, they have a marketing budget of 80 million €. And OpenERP has a marketing budget of 200,000 €, 400 times less than NetSuite. And we had the same visibility. Why? Because we leverage the power of the community. We leverage the power of being open, of discussing with people, social media, and that kind of things. So, when you run an open source software publisher, you expect to not have license revenue, of course, as you are open source, but you can decrease your costs. So you reduce your marketing costs by 400 times compared to the effect you will have. You reduce your R&D costs, not only because you reduce the people you have to pay, but also the product grows very quickly. So it creates value very, very efficiently if you succeed to work efficiently with your community. And you have a very big distribution of the brand. Today, if you go to a bookstore, you buy a magazine. On the magazine, sometimes you have CD with free software on it. So you have a distribution of the software with millions of samples worldwide at no cost. So it's not a problem to drop the licenses today. It's not a problem to drop the 25% of the license if you succeed to cut your costs based on these open source models. Of course, you have to play the game. If you are not fully open, you will not have a fast distribution of the product. You will not have a big contribution of the community and that kind of things. And it works because we succeed to have very big margin. So just imagine, we reduce the revenue of 25%, but we decrease the cost by 400 times in the marketing. And it's probably the same in the research and development. So it's very good to grow. That's the good thing about open source. The bad thing about open source is that the traditional market allows to have some niche players or differentiation politics. So you may have lots of different software that do the same thing. For the ERP, you will have Microsoft Dynamics, Oracle, Sage, SAP, and that kind of thing. For the open source, you only win if you are one of the best. Actually, you win if you are the best. And that's really a problem, because there is no place for a lot of different software. Just imagine the operating system 15 years ago. You had Linux, Unix, Minix, DOS, MS-DOS, Dr. DOS. And after that, you only have Linux for the open source and 2 proprietary software, iOS and Microsoft. It's the same for the Office. 10 years ago, you had Works, WordPerfect, and a lot of them, and now you just have LibreOffice. And why do we have this consolidation or concentration effect? It's that as people can download and test the different software very easily today, if you are open source, they will automatically concentrate on the best one. So the problem with open source is that you have to find a niche where there is no player yet. Or you have to decide and be the first one. If you are not the first one, you will be nothing, because the first one will attract the mass, and the mass will make it grow very quickly. So that was the bad point about open source. And one of the last things I would like to explain you is the split of the role, which is, the slide is not very good, so. When you run an open source software publisher company, it's very important to have a place for the different actors. So you have the software publisher that guarantees the software that there is no bug, that reaches the version 6, the version 7, and the version 8. You have the community, that are people with whom you do not have a contract or legal relationship, but they contribute, they discuss, they criticize. You have the customer that just want to benefit from the software efficiently. And you have service, value-added services companies. The difficulty when you run an open source company is that you have to set up an environment where everyone is satisfied. The customer is easy to satisfy. He has a software which is cheaper and that benefits from the feedback of thousands of people. So the customer is easy to satisfy. Then you have to satisfy the community and the value-added services resellers. And in my opinion, I'm sure that you need everyone. You cannot say, you can do it, some did it, but for that kind of product, you cannot say, I will do it 100% community-based, because the community is good, but each individual develop what they need, and but they do not develop what's important for the mass. As an example, nobody in the community of OpenERP will develop usability stuff. They will not improve the design. They will not invest 50 days to improve the design. They will prefer to train their staff for 3 days rather than investing 50 days to improve the design. So that's something that has been made by the software publisher. And but you also need a community, because the community is the one that will criticize, that will develop the localization of all the countries and things like that. So you have to create incentives for everyone. So you have to give something to the community, the whole source code, plus documentation and things like that. You have to be organized to benefit from what the community produce. So you have to collaborate with everyone, with platforms like Launchpad, GitHub, and things like that. And if you succeed to satisfy everyone and to position yourself in a place where you do not have competitor, or we are sure that you are the first one, then you have a growth that is bigger than most of the others proprietary software, in my opinion. That's all about what I have to say today. Thank you.